In today's video, we're going to be talking about lens choice for the landscape photographer, an important question, a question that I get asked probably more than most other questions. Hey, Nick, what lens should I buy? Hey, Nick, what lens should I buy? Well, I'll tell you what lens you should buy. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell. That way you're notified of future videos. I do a lot of videos like this, post-processing videos, and in the field stuff. So, what lens should you buy? For me personally, I've always felt like I take my best photos with either a very wide lens or a very telephoto lens. So my current setup for when I travel for landscape photography is a 16 to 35 f2.8, a 100 to 400, and my middle lens, which is the 24 to 105. This lens, my 24 to 105, I actually don't use as much as you would think I do. It is a very handy, very versatile lens, and it covers a huge range. But I always find that I take my best photos really wide or really telephoto, and the reason for it is because I feel like those focal lengths, really wide, really telephoto, are more impactful. Because we, as humans, experience life at about 35 to 50 millimeters, I find taking photos at that exact same focal range really boring. That's the cool part about photography and photography lenses like this, is that you can show the viewer something that they don't see on a day-to-day basis. That's why macro photography is so interesting. That's why super telephoto photography is very interesting. Our eyes just don't work like that. And a lot of times I find that photos taken at those focal ranges are just more interesting and more impactful. And in my personal portfolio, my favorite shots are either going to be very wide or very telephoto. Very seldom are they very normal, because who likes normal? So the question becomes, if you are going to have super wide, super telephoto, and then something to fill the gap, what lenses should you pick? It has always been my belief that you need a versatile lens, because as landscape photographers, we're never really in full control over where we can stand. So I always get zoom lenses, so 16 to 35, 100, 400, because I want to be able to cover a wide range of lenses. But you'll always get that person that is always like, actually, I much prefer the sharpness from my prime lenses over my zoom lenses. I find them to be much sharper. Absolute sharpness is where it's at. And to that person, I say a good composition trumps absolute perfect sharpness every single time. I would rather have a better composition than a weak composition with perfect sharpness. But then they will say, actually, you can always just zoom with your feet. So you don't need all of those focal lengths. You just need to zoom with your feet. And to that I say, well, Mr. Portrait Photographer, why don't you come with me to the Faroe Islands? Because in the Faroe Islands, if you zoom with your feet, you die. As landscape photographers, we're often not in control over where we can and cannot stand. It's not a portrait session where we can tell our subject to take a step backwards or take a step towards us. We need to be versatile. We need to be versatile in the ways of what focal lengths we have available to us, because we're not always in control over where we are or where our subject is. We need to be flexible. So that's why I always go with zoom lenses. So on the super wide side of things, I've always preferred a 16 to 35 millimeter lens. One of the biggest reasons that I've always preferred a 16 to 35 over, say, a 12 to 24 or 14 to 24 or whatever is the fact that it accepts screw-on filters. So for example, all of my filters fit in this small little case. I don't have to pack around any of those big 100 millimeter square filters with a giant holder and some kind of mounting apparatus. All I have to do is just easily screw on my filters, and then I don't have to deal with that. So I am sacrificing a little bit of focal range on the widest side of things, but if I need wider than 16 millimeters, I can always just go into vertical orientation, shoot a panorama. But if you don't mind the extra size, the extra weight of those large filters, I mean, honestly, a lot of times you don't need filters anyway. So you might think about something wider than a 16 to 35, but I also like the focal range. Being able to go from 16 millimeters to 35 millimeters, much more handy than going from 12 to 24. On the telephoto side of things, it is really nice to have 400 millimeters available to you when you want it. There's a lot of shooting scenarios where 400 millimeters comes in very handy. It brings in that mountain from the distance. You can fill the frame with those impactful waves. Before I switched to Sony, I used to use the Canon 70-300 rather than the 100-400, and that was mostly just a size thing. You know, the 70-300 is not only a more affordable lens, but it's much smaller, fits in the bag easier, and it goes all the way down to 70, which fills that gap between 35 and 70. And then in those situations, I wouldn't even have to take a middle focal range. There are some people, however, that love their 24-70s and their 24-105s. While it is a very, very versatile focal range, I mean, a lot of types of photography, you use that a lot. But in my work, I always find that my most impactful stuff is always on the super wide or the super telephoto, because I'm not out trying to capture normal. A lot of times I just feel like those middle focal ranges from 35 to like 70 millimeters are just kind of boring, you know? I want to capture like epic and dramatic and impactful and, you know, spectacular, not normal, you know? I've got enough normal in my life. So my recommendation for you guys is to make sure that you have a wide angle lens that goes super wide. If you're on a full frame camera, we're talking 16-35, 12-24, 14-24, somewhere in that really wide range. If you're on a crop sensor, that's more like 10-22, somewhere in there. You want to have those wide focal lengths, just because a lot of times those types of photos are more immersive. You're seeing it's stretching out that big, beautiful sunset, or it's stretching out that foreground, and it makes it feel like the viewer is seeing what is at your feet, because they are seeing what is at your feet. Also, telephoto lenses reaching out and grabbing things that are off in the distance and bringing them in close. That stuff is what's impactful, and it's what's interesting. Nobody wants to see what they would take with their cell phone. They want to see what they couldn't take with their cell phone. And that's why I like these particular lenses. It doesn't have to be a 100-400. It could easily be a 70-200. I just like that extra reach of the 400. It also kind of doubles as my impromptu wildlife lens. All right, so that's pretty much what I got for you guys today. Leave comments down below if you disagree with me, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that do. I know there's going to be defenders of the 24-70 in the landscape photography community, but I argue that you can get away with a 16-35, 70-200, and abandon that middle focal range, because you could always just go vertical orientation, do a pano if you really needed that like 50 millimeters, which who needs 50 millimeters? Well, actually, I prefer the 50 millimeter focal range because it's what I see every day and it's all I'm really comfortable with. Anyway, we'll catch you guys later. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next video.